In the fall of 2011, a park ranger entered a cave system in the southern Great Smoky Mountains to investigate reports of illegal occupation. He expected a drifter camp. What he found instead were two figures standing in the dark, watching him. They were covered in scars. Their hair hung in matted ropes. Their eyes reflected his flashlight the way an animal's eyes do. They did not speak. They did not react to his voice at all. When he tried to communicate, the larger one dropped its shoulders, bared its teeth and charged. The smaller one flanked him from the right. They were working together. The ranger fired a warning shot into the ceiling and barely made it out of the cave alive. When he reported what had happened, his supervisors told him to classify the encounter as a bear sighting. When he pushed back, he was reassigned to a desk. The cave entrance was gated and locked. The trail was rerouted, and the official record never mentioned that anything human had been living inside that mountain. He has asked for anonymity, so the specific details will be changed, so we will call him Dale Briscoe. He served as a backcountry ranger in Great Smoky Mountains National Park from 2008 to 2012. He has quit the ranger job. He still hikes, but he does not go near the southern caves, not anymore. This is his account. The Smoky Mountains contain over 800 miles of maintained trails, but beneath those trails is a network of limestone caves and solution channels that most visitors never see. The park sits on ancient rock, Ordovician limestone, nearly 500 million years old, dissolved and reshaped by groundwater over epochs into passages that run for miles beneath the ridgelines. Most of the cave systems in the Smokies are closed to the public. The Park Service sealed many of them decades ago, partly to protect endangered bat populations, partly because the terrain inside is too dangerous for recreational exploration. Vertical drops, flooded passages, unstable ceilings, but sealed does not always mean inaccessible. Gates rust, concrete erodes, sinkholes open new entrances that no one mapped. And in the remote southern sections of the park, where the nearest maintained trail might be 4 or 5 miles away, there are openings in the rock that have never been catalogued by anyone. In the summer of 2011, backcountry campers in the Hazel Creek drainage started reporting strange incidents. Food going missing from bear canisters that had been properly sealed. Not torn open the way a bear would. Opened, latches undone, lids removed. The food taken cleanly, with no damage to the container. Then a researcher from the University of Tennessee who was conducting a salamander survey in one of the lower cave systems found something unusual. Bones, stacked, not scattered the way an animal carcass breaks down naturally, arranged. Small animal bones mostly, rabbit, raccoon, squirrel, stacked in a deliberate pattern against a cave wall.
That was the moment I first heard of what would come to haunt me for the rest of my life. Just some rumors at first.
A week later, a trail maintenance crew working near Bone Valley found fire scorch marks deep inside a chamber that had no natural ventilation. No smoke exit. Someone had built a fire underground in a space where the smoke had nowhere to go. That suggested someone who either did not understand fire or did not care about breathing clean air. Then, a rural property owner on the boundary of the park reported a missing dog, a large mixed breed about 90 pounds that had been chained in a yard near the tree line. The chain was still attached to the stake. The collar was still attached to the chain, but the dog was gone. The collar had been unbuckled, not broken, not chewed through, unbuckled by fingers that understood how a buckle worked. Individually, none of these reports would have triggered much of a response. Together, they painted a picture of someone living in the backcountry, someone who understood how to open containers but chose to live underground, someone who built fires in sealed chambers, someone who had taken a dog from its collar without breaking the chain. Dale's supervisor, a man named Tom Eccles, called him into his office on a Tuesday morning and told him to check the cave network in the Hazel Creek area. He described it as a welfare check. He said they probably had a transient, or maybe a pair of them, possibly mentally ill, possibly veterans, living rough in the caves. He wanted Dale to locate them, assess the situation, and call for backup if they needed to be removed. Dale went in alone. That was his first mistake.
I was pretty stupid back then. You hear all these scary stories and you tell yourself you'd never be this dumb. But here I am. I just went there all alone.
Standard protocol for a potential confrontation with an unknown individual in the backcountry was to bring a second ranger, but they were short-staffed that week. 2 rangers were out with injuries. Another was on leave. Tom told him to use his judgment. He judged wrong. He packed his standard sidearm, a 6-hour P226 in .40 caliber. He brought a radio, extra batteries, 2 liters of water, a headlamp, a handheld flashlight, a camera, and a first aid kit. He did not bring a rifle. He did not bring a partner. He expected a drifter camp. The hike-in took about 4 hours. The first 2 were on maintained trail. The last 2 were off-trail, following a drainage channel south into increasingly rugged terrain. The forest canopy was thick: tulip poplar, red oak, eastern hemlock. The understory was dense with rhododendron, so thick in places he had to push through it with his arms. By the time he reached the cave entrance, his uniform was soaked with sweat, and his forearms were scratched raw. The entrance was a low opening at the base of a limestone bluff, partially hidden by a curtain of Virginia creeper. You would walk past it without noticing unless you knew what to look for. He had the GPS coordinates from the salamander researcher. Without them, he never would have found it. He clicked on his headlamp and went inside. The entrance passage was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, 5 feet tall. He had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling. The floor was slick with moisture and covered in a thin layer of clay that made every step uncertain. The air temperature dropped immediately, from the mid-80s outside to what felt like the low 50s inside. The passage descended at a gentle angle for about 200 feet, then leveled out and widened into a room roughly the size of a 2-car garage. His headlamp swept across the walls. He saw the scorch marks first, black streaks on the limestone ceiling where fires had been built directly on the cave floor. The rock beneath was cracked from repeated heat. He saw the bone stacks next, exactly as the researcher had described. Small animal bones arranged against the wall in neat rows, not tossed aside, placed. There was an order to it that he could not quite understand, but he could see it. The skulls were separated from the long bones. The ribs were grouped together. Against the far wall, he found what looked like bedding, dried leaves and moss packed into depressions in the cave floor. 2 depressions about 3 feet apart, worn smooth by repeated use. Whoever was sleeping here had been doing it for a long time.
To this day, this is still the strangest thing I have ever witnessed. I tell you, these were stacked bones. I should have realized at the time to back away.
He moved deeper. The room connected to a second passage that curved left and descended further. The air grew colder. He could hear water dripping somewhere ahead, a steady rhythm that echoed off the stone. He smelled them before he saw them. A thick animal smell, not exactly like any animal he could name. Not bear, not coyote. Something sharper, something sour, like a body that had not been washed in years combined with the mineral tang of the cave itself. It was the smell of a living thing that had become part of the rock. He came around a bend in the passage, and his headlamp found the first one. It was crouched against the wall about 20 feet ahead. His first thought was that it was a person, in terrible condition. Filthy, skin darkened with grime and scarring, hair hanging in matted ropes past his shoulders. It was thin, but not emaciated. The muscles in its arms and legs were defined, ropey, like someone who had spent a lifetime climbing and crawling through stone. It was male. He could see that much. Age was harder to determine. The skin on its face was weathered and creased in a way that could have meant 30 or 50. Its eyes were open. They caught his headlamp and reflected the light back at him in a way that made his stomach drop. Not the red reflectance you get from a flash photograph. Something flatter, more like the eyeshine of a nocturnal animal. He stopped moving. He raised one hand slowly, palm open, the way you would approach a frightened dog.
I said, "Hey, it is okay. I am not here to hurt you." But I got no response. No recognition that I had spoken. No change in posture.
The eyes tracked him, but the face showed nothing. No fear, no curiosity, no confusion, just observation. The blank, steady gaze of something assessing a stimulus. Then he saw the second one. It emerged from a crevice in the wall behind and to the right of the first. Smaller, thinner, younger, he thought, though he could not be sure. Its movements were fluid and silent, the kind of silence that comes from a lifetime of moving through confined spaces. It positioned itself about 6 feet from the first figure, slightly behind and to the side. That positioning is what made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was not random. It was coordinated, one in front, one flanking, the way a predator pair works together.
I tried talking again. I told them, "I am a park ranger. I can help you. Do you need help?" Still nothing. No flicker of comprehension. The words hit them the way wind hits rock. They simply did not register.
Then the behavior changed. The older one made a sound, low, from deep in the chest. Not a growl exactly, a vocalization, a frequency that Dale could feel more than hear, resonating in the bones of his face. The younger one responded with a shorter version of the same sound, a click at the back of the throat, followed by a hiss of expelled air through the teeth. The older one showed its teeth, not a smile, not a snarl, a display. The lips pulled back deliberately, exposing teeth that were worn and yellowed but intact. The shoulders dropped, the hands flexed open and closed. Dale had spent 2 decades in the wilderness. He had encountered aggressive bears, territorial elk, defensive rattlesnakes. He recognized a threat display when he saw one. Every signal this thing was sending said the same thing. "You are in my territory, and if you do not leave, I will make you leave." The older one charged. It did not run the way a person runs. It lunged, low to the ground, using both its arms and legs to cover distance. The movement was explosive and close to the floor, designed for the confined space of the tunnel. It closed 20 feet in what felt like a single heartbeat. At the same time, the younger one moved to his right, not charging, circling, flanking. They were working together. The older one drove him backward, while the younger one cut off his retreat to the side passage. He stumbled backward. His boot caught on a ridge in the cave floor, and he went down hard on one knee. The impact sent a shock up through his thigh. The older one was on him before he could stand. It grabbed at his pack. Its hands were incredibly strong, fingers like cables. It bit the fabric of his shoulder strap. He felt the pressure of its jaw through the nylon, through the padding, through his uniform shirt. It was not trying to bite him. It was trying to pull him down. Its hand raked across his forearm. The nails were thick and overgrown, almost claw-like. They tore through his sleeve and left 3 parallel scratches from his elbow to his wrist. He drew his sidearm and fired one round into the cave ceiling.
The sound in that enclosed space was so loud, a sound that hits your eardrums like a head blow.
Rock dust rained down from the impact point. The muzzle flash lit the chamber in a blinding white strobe. They scattered, instantly. No hesitation, no confusion. They simply vanished into the darkness, deeper into the cave system, moving with a speed and silence that should not have been possible for anything that large. One moment they were there. The next, he was alone, ears ringing, heart pounding, blood dripping from his forearm onto the cave floor. No screaming, no words, no vocalizations at all. Just movement. Pure, silent, practiced movement. The kind that comes from living in darkness for so long that you no longer need light to navigate. He backed out the way he had come. He did not turn around until he reached the entrance. He kept his sidearm in one hand and his flashlight in the other, sweeping the beam back and forth, watching every shadow. The 200 feet to the entrance felt like 2 miles. Every sound amplified in that tunnel. Every drip of water could have been a footstep. Every shift in the air could have been something moving behind him. When he stepped back into the sunlight, it took his eyes a full minute to adjust. The forest around him seemed impossibly bright, impossibly normal. Birds singing, wind in the canopy, the ordinary sounds of a summer afternoon in the Smokies. It was disorienting. 30 minutes earlier, he had been inside a world that operated on completely different rules, and now he was standing in a forest that looked like a postcard. The contrast made both places feel unreal. He sat on a rock near the cave entrance and cleaned the scratches on his arm. They were shallow but long. The blood had dried in streaks down to his wrist. He pressed a bandage from his kit against the wound and sat there for a while, just breathing. His hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, from the chemical dump of adrenaline leaving his system, from the slow realization that he had been seconds away from something much worse. Then he picked up his radio and called it in. He used the phrase hostile transients. He described the encounter as 2 individuals, possibly mentally ill, exhibiting aggressive and nonverbal behavior in a cave system. He requested backup. The response from his supervisors was not what he expected. Tom Eccles listened to his report. He asked Dale to repeat the part about the vocalizations. He asked him to repeat the part about the coordinated movement. Then he went quiet for a long time. When he came back, he told Dale to return to the ranger station. He said they would handle it from here. He did not say who they were. He did not offer specifics.
I had expected a bit more shock from him. You know what I mean? I am telling you about something strange, and you act like it is a normal problem you have every day. He said, Dale, you did not see what you think you saw. The park does not need a media circus. Write your report. Classify the encounter as wildlife misidentification. Move on.
Dale pressed him. He told him these people needed medical attention. He told him the younger one could be a minor. He told him the cave conditions were dangerous and that if they did not intervene, someone was going to die down there. Tom repeated himself. Return to the station. We will handle it. The next day, a team Dale did not recognize arrived at the park. They were not rangers. They wore plain clothes and carried equipment he had never seen in their supply chain. Radio gear, camera equipment. Cases that were sealed and labeled with numbers instead of words. They spoke to Tom in his office for an hour with the door closed. When Dale asked Tom what was going on, Tom looked at him with an expression he had never seen from the man. Tom was steady. 30 years in the park service. Nothing rattled him. But that morning, something was different. Dale asked him what wildlife he was supposed to have misidentified. Tom said, "Bear. You startled a bear in a cave. That is what happened. That is what the report will say. Dale told him bears do not work in coordinated pairs. Bears do not make vocalizations like what he heard. Bears do not have human hands. Tom looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Write the report, Dale." And that was the end of the conversation. Dale wrote the report. He classified it as a bear encounter. He filed it and tried to move on. But he could not. Something was living in those caves. Something human, or something that had once been human, and no one was going to help them. 2 weeks after the initial encounter, he went back. He did not tell anyone. He did not file a backcountry permit. He went on his day off, dressed in civilian clothes, carrying a small pack with water, binoculars, a camera with a telephoto lens, and nothing else. He left his sidearm in his truck. He was not going inside. He was going to watch. He found a position on a ridge about 200 yards above the cave entrance. He was upwind. He had good sight lines through a gap in the rhododendron. He settled in at dawn and waited. Nothing happened for 6 hours. The cave entrance was dark and still. He ate a granola bar. He watched a red-tailed hawk circle the valley. He started to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing. Then, just before dusk, movement. The older one emerged first. It came out of the cave in a low crouch, head turning left and right, scanning the forest. It moved to a rock near the entrance and crouched there for several minutes, motionless, watching. Its eyes swept the tree line methodically. It was checking for threats before exposing itself. Once it seemed satisfied, it made a sound. That same low vocalization he had heard underground. A moment later, the younger one appeared. They moved together through the undergrowth, heading downslope toward a small stream about 100 yards from the cave. They moved at dusk. They avoided the patches of open sunlight that still filtered through the canopy. When they crossed a clearing, they moved fast, almost running, keeping low. Dale watched them for 3 hours that first evening. What he saw disturbed him more than the attack had. They drank from the cave runoff where it pooled in a limestone depression. They used rocks to crack open the shells of crayfish they pulled from the stream. They ate the crayfish raw, using their fingers to pull the meat from the shells. The older one caught a small rabbit. Dale did not see how exactly. One moment the rabbit was there, the next the older one had it. It killed it with a quick motion and carried it back toward the cave. No tools, no technique beyond raw speed and strength. They groomed each other. The younger one picked through the older one's hair, removing debris the way primates do. The older one tolerated this, sitting still, eyes half closed. It was the most peaceful behavior he observed, the only time they seemed calm. The older one showed protective behavior toward the younger one. When a noise in the forest startled them, a branch falling, a deer moving through the brush, the older one positioned itself between the sound and the younger one. Every time, automatically, the way a parent shields a child. Dale went back every week for 6 weeks, always on his days off, always alone, always from the ridge. He never went inside the cave again. He never got closer than 200 yards. Over those 6 weeks, he built a picture of how they lived. They were almost entirely nocturnal. They emerged at dusk and returned before dawn. They avoided direct sunlight. They hunted small animals, foraged along the stream, and drank from groundwater. They did not use fire during the weeks he observed them, though the scorch marks in the cave suggested they had at some point in the past. On one occasion, Dale watched the older one sit motionless on a rock for nearly 40 minutes, staring into the forest without moving a single muscle, just watching, processing, taking in information about its environment with a patience that no modern human possesses. It reminded him of how a mountain lion hunts, not with speed, with stillness, with the understanding that the world will eventually come to you if you wait long enough. They communicated through a system of vocalizations, grunts, throat clicks, hisses, short bursts of sound that carried specific meanings he could not decode but could recognize as consistent. The same sound produced the same response every time. No words, no language. Nothing that resembled speech in any human sense. Just sounds, signals, the kind of communication you see between animals that have lived together long enough to develop their own shorthand. And then there was the detail that haunted him most. They never approached the trails, not once. In 6 weeks of observation, they never moved in the direction of any maintained trail, any campsite, any structure. They actively avoided the areas where hikers traveled. When they heard human voices in the distance, they retreated immediately into the cave. That told him everything. If these were lost hikers, they would try to signal. They would move toward the trails. They would seek contact with other people. That is what a person who has been lost does, no matter how disoriented they are. They seek other humans. These two did the opposite. They avoided humans the way prey avoids predators. The avoidance was not learned from a single experience. It was conditioned, deep, automatic. Whatever they were, they had been this way for a very long time. The younger one mimicked the older one's movements exactly. When the older one crouched, the younger one crouched. When the older one moved its head to scan the forest, the younger one followed a half-second later, performing the same sweep in the same direction. This was not imitation in the way a child copies a parent for fun. This was learning. The younger one was studying the older one's behavior and replicating it as a survival strategy. The way it moved, the way it ate, the way it scanned for danger, all of it was copied from the older one. They ate everything raw. When the older one caught a rabbit, it tore it apart and consumed it immediately. No attempt to cook it, no attempt to prepare it in any way. The younger one waited until the older one had finished, then took what was left. There was a hierarchy, clear and consistent. They slept curled tightly against each other in the cave. On nights when Dale stayed late enough to watch them return, he could hear them settling in, the sounds of two bodies pressing together in the dark. They did not use tools beyond rocks. They used rocks to crack shells and to scrape hides. But there were no modified tools, no sharpened edges, no hafted implements, no progression beyond what a primate might develop on its own. The technology was pre-human, or post-human, depending on how you looked at it. But the detail that disturbed him more than anything else, more than the aggression, more than the silence, more than the way they moved in the dark, was something he noticed about the younger one's relationship to the sky. On the rare occasions when they emerged while there was still some light above the canopy, the younger one would look up briefly, then look away. Not with fear exactly, with discomfort, the way you might squint at a bright light and then avert your gaze. The open sky was too much, too vast, too unfamiliar. This was a being that had spent its entire conscious life underground. The cave was not a shelter it had chosen. The cave was the only world it knew. How long had they been there? After the observation, weeks ended. Dale started pulling records, not through official channels. He did not trust official channels anymore. He went to the county library in Bryson City. He went to the Cherokee Museum. He searched microfilm archives of the Asheville Citizen-Times. He pulled missing persons files from the North Carolina and Tennessee state databases. He was looking for unsolved disappearances in the southern Smokies, cases where someone went into the backcountry and never came out, cases with no body, no resolution. He found more than he expected. In 1987, a 6-year-old boy disappeared during a flash flood event in the Hazel Creek watershed. His family was camping at a backcountry site. The The water rose fast. In the chaos, the boy was separated from his parents. Search teams spent 11 days covering the drainage. They found his jacket, snagged on a branch half a mile downstream. They never found him. In 1993, a father and his 12-year-old son went caving in an unauthorized section of the park near Fontana. They told friends they would be back by evening. They were not. A search found their vehicle at a pull-off on Lakeview Drive. Their packs were found inside the first chamber of a cave system. The cave went deep. The searchers did not follow. The case was classified as an underground accident. No bodies were ever recovered. In 1998, a backcountry squatter was rumored to be living somewhere in the Hazel Creek drainage. Hikers reported finding crude shelters, a fire ring, scraps of clothing. A park volunteer said she saw a figure moving through the trees at dusk, moving fast, staying low, not responding when she called out. The rangers searched but found nothing conclusive. None of these cases were connected. They sat in separate files, in separate jurisdictions, separated by years. But when Dale laid them out on his kitchen table and looked at them together, a pattern formed. The ages roughly matched. If the 6-year-old from the 1987 flood survived and somehow found his way underground, he would have been 30 in 2011. The older figure Dale observed could have been 30. It was hard to tell. The conditions of that life would age a person in ways that make estimation almost impossible. Dale also found smaller reports that never made the missing persons databases. A backcountry permit filed in 1991 by a solo hiker that was never closed out. A car found abandoned at a trailhead in 1995 with the keys still in the ignition. A set of hiking poles found leaning against a tree near a sinkhole in 2003, with no owner ever identified. The southern Smokies had been swallowing people for decades. Most of them were probably accidents, falls, drownings, hypothermia. The mountains kill people every year, and the terrain is unforgiving enough that bodies are sometimes never found. But some of those disappearances had details that did not fit the usual patterns. People who vanished on clear days, on well-marked trails, in areas with no obvious hazards. People who simply stopped existing between one checkpoint and the next. But then a worse thought took hold. One that he did not want to follow to its conclusion. What if only one of those children was lost from the surface? What if the older one had arrived as a child, grown up entirely in those caves, adapted to that life completely, and then, at some point, had offspring? The younger figure was smaller. Its behavior was entirely derivative of the older one. It showed no independent survival strategies. Everything it did, it had learned from watching the other. If the older one arrived as a child in the late 1980s and adapted, and the younger one was born underground sometime in the late 1990s or early 2000s, then what Dale was looking at was not two lost people. He was looking at a second-generation feral human, someone who had never seen the surface world, someone who had never heard language, someone for whom the cave was not a prison, but the entire scope of existence. He thought about it constantly. He thought about calling someone, a university, a medical team, someone who could go in there, sedate them, bring them out, and give them the life they had been denied. But then he would replay the attack, the speed, the coordination, the total absence of language, the way they moved in perfect darkness without hesitation, the way they treated the cave not as a hiding place, but as a home. And he thought about what the research says, not speculation, documented science. What happens to a human mind when it develops without language, without social contact, without the inputs that shape a person into a person? There is a concept in developmental neuroscience called the critical period for language acquisition. The first years of life represent a window during which the brain is primed to absorb language. If that window closes without exposure, the ability to acquire language is permanently impaired. Not delayed, not diminished, permanently lost. There are documented cases, children discovered after years of isolation who could never fully learn to speak despite intensive intervention. Their brains had developed without the architecture for language. The neural pathways that would have supported speech had been recruited for other functions: sensory processing, spatial awareness, the kind of heightened perception you would need to survive in total darkness. Social cognition suffers the same fate. The ability to read facial expressions, to understand social cues, to form attachments in the way that humans typically do, all of it depends on early exposure. Without it, the deficits are severe and permanent. If Dale was right about the younger one, if it had been born and raised entirely underground, then the critical window had closed decades ago. There was no rehabilitation. There was no therapy. There was no program that could teach this person to be a person in the way we understand the word. If they were pulled out, it would not be a rescue. It would be the destruction of the only world they knew, replaced with one they could never comprehend. They would spend the rest of their lives in an institution, terrified, confused, unable to communicate, unable to understand why they had been torn from the only existence that made sense to them. Dale sat with that for a long time. Weeks, months. The moral weight of it pressed down on him every day. Do you intervene? Do you leave them? Is it crueler to act or to look away? He never found an answer he was comfortable with. After he pushed the issue internally one more time, after he submitted a written memo to Tom Eccles requesting a formal investigation into the cave system, things changed. He was reassigned, moved from the backcountry unit to a desk position at the Sugarlands Visitor Center. Effective immediately. No explanation beyond a vague reference to staffing needs. The cave entrance was inspected by a team he never met and declared structurally unstable. A gate was installed. The trail leading to the area was rerouted. Signs were posted warning of rockfall hazard. None of the official documentation mentioned human presence. None of it referenced his original report or his encounters. As far as the park records were concerned, nothing had ever lived in those caves except bats and salamanders. He went back one last time. Off duty. Off the record. He hiked in from a different direction to avoid the new signage. He found the cave entrance gated and locked. A heavy steel gate bolted into the limestone, the kind of installation that costs tens of thousands of dollars and requires a specialized crew to assemble. For a cave that officially held nothing but bats and salamanders, it was an extraordinary amount of infrastructure. Dale stood there for 20 minutes, listening. He did not hear anything. No vocalizations, no movement, just the drip of water on stone and the whisper of wind across the entrance. But inside, past the gate, he could see shapes in the dust near the entrance. The bedding depressions were still visible. A small pile of bones sat against the wall, and on the gate itself, on the inside, he could see marks in the metal. Scratches, deep grooves where something had clawed at the bars. Not the shallow scratches a raccoon might leave. These were gouged into the steel with force and desperation. They were still in there, or they had been recently. The gate had not kept them out. It had locked them in. Dale retired the following year. After he retired, he started reading. Not park records, history, folklore, accounts that went back centuries. He discovered that what he had seen was not new, not even close. In 1845, along the Devil's River in southwest Texas, settlers reported seeing a girl running with wolves. Multiple witnesses over several years described a child and later a young woman, moving on all fours, feeding alongside a wolf pack and resisting all attempts at capture. She was spotted near watering holes at dusk. She fled from any human approach. The accounts described a low gait, an animal feeding posture, and a complete absence of human behavior. The settlers called her the Wolf Girl of Devil's River. They assumed she'd been raised by wolves because that was the only explanation their framework could support. But the more Dale read, the more he wondered if the wolves were incidental. If she had been abandoned as an infant, or lost during the Comanche raids that devastated the region in that period, and she survived, then she would have developed exactly the way those witnesses described. Low gait from years of crawling before she could walk, animal feeding behavior from eating whatever she could find, resistance to capture because she had never known human contact. The wolves did not raise her, no one did, and the result looked the same. Throughout the 19th century, American frontier newspapers occasionally ran stories about wild children. A boy captured in the woods of Kentucky who could not speak and ran when touched. A girl found in a cave in Missouri who walked on all fours and hissed at her rescuers. A child discovered living alone in the Ozark Hills who had survived for years on raw fish and insects. Most of these accounts were sensationalized. Some were outright fabrications, but a handful matched patterns that were too consistent to dismiss. Children who had survived in the wild long enough to lose their connection to human society. Children whose brains had developed around the demands of survival rather than the demands of language and social life. Dale found accounts from the Cherokee as well. The Smoky Mountains are Cherokee homeland, and their oral histories contain references to people who lived inside the mountains. Not spirits, not supernatural beings. People who had gone into the caves and never returned. People whose descendants were sometimes seen at the mouths of tunnels at dusk, watching but never approaching. The Cherokee had a name for them. Dale will not share it, because the elders he spoke with asked him not to, but the translation was roughly, those who chose the dark. The emphasis was on chose. In the Cherokee understanding, these were not victims. They were people who had made a decision generations ago to live apart, and over time, the decision had become permanent. The caves provided everything they needed: water, shelter, prey, and the darkness provided something else: invisibility. As long as they stayed below the surface, the world above forgot they existed, and forgetting in the mountains is the same as permission. One elder told Dale a story that had been passed down through his family for at least 5 generations. He said that in the years before removal, before the Trail of Tears scattered the Cherokee Nation, there were families who refused to leave, not by hiding in the hollows the way some did, by going deeper, by descending into the limestone systems where no soldiers would follow, where no maps reached, where the mountain itself became the barrier between them and the world that was trying to erase them. The elder said those families were never seen on the surface again, but their fires were sometimes smelled at night, drifting up through fissures in the rock, and their children and their children's children grew up knowing nothing else. He said the mountain took care of them the way a mother takes care of something she has hidden. He said they were still there. He said they had always been there. Dale does not know if that story is history or legend. He suspects it is both. The Smokies are old enough to hold both without contradiction. People ask Dale sometimes why he never went to the media, why he never called a journalist or wrote a book or contacted a university. The answer is complicated. Part of it is that he signed documents when he retired. Non-disclosure agreements that he was told were standard, but that he suspects were not. Part of it is that he does not have proof. One photograph taken in bad lighting inside a cave is not evidence. It is a curiosity. It would be dismissed. But the real reason, The honest reason is that he is not sure exposure would help anyone. If the world found out about them, what happens next? A media frenzy, camera crews hiking into the backcountry, researchers with tranquilizer guns, a government operation to extract two beings from the only home they have ever known. Beings who cannot speak, cannot understand what is happening to them, cannot consent to their own rescue. They would be studied, photographed, written about in journals, and argued about on television. And through all of it, they would understand nothing. They would simply be terrified. Two creatures ripped from darkness into light, surrounded by a species they had spent their entire lives avoiding. Dale does not think animals raised them. He does not think they were abandoned by a secret society or hidden by a conspiracy. He thinks something much simpler and much worse happened. He thinks no one raised them. He thinks a child was lost, and the wilderness did what the wilderness does. It provided, it shaped, it made something new out of something human. And that, to him, is more disturbing than any monster story, because it means the line between us and them is thinner than we want to believe. A few years without language, a few years without light, a few years without another human face, and the distance between a person and whatever he saw in that cave becomes very small. He still hikes, he still carries a camera, he still loves the mountains, but he stays on the trails now. He does not go near the southern cave systems. He does not explore unmarked passages. When the trail ends, he turns around, because he knows something that most hikers do not. He knows that the Smoky Mountains are not empty. He knows that the darkness beneath those ridges holds something that used to be like us, something that forgot how to be like us, something that learned to live without light, without words, without any of the things we believe make us human. Every year, around 9 million people visit Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They drive the loop roads. They photograph the elk in Cataloochee. They hike to Klingman's Dome and take pictures of the view. They camp in designated sites with bear cables and fire rings and neighbors 20 feet away. And they go home believing they have experienced the wilderness. They have not. They have experienced the surface, the curated version, the version the Park Service built for them, with signs and bridges and boundaries that keep them on the path. The real wilderness is below. It is in the limestone, in the dark, in the places where the rock swallows sound and light does not reach. And in those places, something is watching the headlamps pass overhead and waiting for them to move on. And they are still down there. If you go deep enough into those mountains, if you leave the trails far enough behind and push into the places where the rock opens up and the light disappears, you stop being at the top of the food chain, not because of bears, not because of mountain lions, but because something else learned how to live without us. And what lives without us does not need us, does not want us, and does not understand mercy the way we understand it. Dale closes his windows some nights, not because of the cold, because sometimes, when the wind blows just right down the valley from the direction of the park, he thinks he can hear something, a low sound, almost like humming, coming from somewhere beneath the ground. He turns on every light in the house when that happens. He sits in his chair and he waits for morning, but the sound does not stop. It just fades until the next time he is listening. And he is always listening now,